Hi, everybody. You're all welcome to our meetup for the month of September. My name is Linda Tiffel, and I am the convener of Women in Research, Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning. And we have the privilege of welcoming our guest in the person of Jenean Pretorius, who I'll be introducing soon. But before she comes, would engage in one icebreaker activity, and then we can dive straight in. So I'll share my screen just to quickly go through what we'll be anticipating for today. So kindly confirm when you can see my screen. And while I'm pulling up my screen, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. All right, I hope you can all see my screen.
Yes.
Yes, great, thank you. All right, so this is going to be our agenda for today. So we can just dive straight into the icebreaker, and we'll be engaging in an activity called Where in the World? Where in the World? It's very simple. So I'll be pulling up images, one image per slide, and I would like you to type in the chat, or if you want to unmute, and guess where the monument or the tourist site is located in the world. So the first one up, can anyone guess? Or if you know the place, you can type in the chat. Feel free to share whatever comes to mind. We're just here to have some good fun. Great, France. Yes, Jenean, that's correct. Do you know the exact monument by any chance?
I think it's just outside the Louvre.
Yes.
I forget the monument name, but
yes.
Yeah,
It's the Louvre Museum in Paris. Yes, you're right. Okay, let me see. Did someone also type in the chat? Okay, so that's correct. Okay, so next one. So next one we have here. Any guesses? I'm also generous enough to provide some clues if you ask me. Okay, at least I can give you one clue. So this place is in Asia.
Mm.
I'm sure maybe you can guess by the architecture.
Mm.
Anyone wants to try? Okay, the name of the country begins with the letter T.
Is it Thailand?
Yeah, it's Thailand. So this place is called the Grand Palace, and it's located specifically in Bangkok. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, this one is like a bonus. I guess most of us should know this one. Any guesses? Let me call out some people in the list. Joy, Josephine, Blessings, Bernard, Maudline, Nina. Anyone wants to guess? Okay, let me just give one clue then. So it's somewhere in the Middle East.
Hi,
Hi.
it's Joy. It's in Dubai.
Yeah,
I know it's one of the highest high-rise buildings in the
sure,
world.
sure.
Trying to remember the name.
Okay, let me help you out. So it begins with the letter B. B for boy.
The Burj Khalifa or something like that.
Correct. Yes, exactly. That's it. Yes, that's a good one, Joy. Thank you. Okay, so we have two more. So this is the last but one. This one is also like a bonus. So maybe just one clue. It's in Europe. And the country's name begins with, okay, Nina, please go for it.
Yes. Sorry for my English. I'm not
No
very
problem.
fluent in English,
Feel
but I
free.
will try.
Sure.
I think that I have two choices.
Okay.
First is Roma, and the second is Greece.
Okay. The first
It's
one.
two countries. Yes.
Yeah, it's in Rome.
Great.
Yeah. And
Okay.
the name of this historic monument is the Colosseum, or the Colosseum, if you want to pronounce it that way. Yeah, so that's correct. Okay. Next one. This one might be a bit challenging, but yeah, anyone can just give a try. It's not a very well-known monument. Even for me, when I was looking up some of the images and I chanced upon this one, I'd never heard of it before. But if anyone knows, so I'll just give one clue. It's in one of the North African countries. Okay, and the country begins with the letter A.
I can try. Algeria.
Okay, yes, it's in Algeria.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and the name of the monument is it's called the Makam Echahed or Ekahed in a place called El Madania in Algeria. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, thank you all for participating. That's interesting. Very nice to have this activity. Okay, so I will introduce our speaker shortly. Okay, so Jenean, our speaker for today, is a senior monitoring and evaluation specialist. She's the lead of capacity strengthening business line at the Center for Learning on Evaluation and Results, Anglophone Africa, or also known as CLARE AA, at the University of the Witwatersrand, or University of Wits, Johannesburg, South Africa. She has a BA in politics and international relations and a master's in management, specializing in public policy, and currently reading for a PhD in inclusive education at Wits University. She has worked across the private, public, and NGO sectors over the past 15 years. Her core function at CLARE AA includes facilitating and training curriculum reviews and development, and overall capacity building at country and institutional levels. Her country program work includes Eswatini, Malawi, Lesotho, Rwanda, Zambia, Liberia, Malaysia, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Ethiopia. Her research areas of interest are at the nexus between development, adaptive capacities, and innovation for sustainability. In her spare time, she writes fiction and poetry. So, participants, please welcome Jenean warmly to the stage. She'll be giving us this lovely presentation on the topic that we have for today, which is Women in MEARL, Breaking Boundaries, Redefining Pathways, and Future Frontiers. Right, Jenean, over to you, your audience.
Great, great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Linda. And good evening, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. And I really was humbled when Linda invited us to share with you from our very limited experience in this space. But we certainly are quite pleased to be able to do so. And I'm really looking forward to an engaging discussion in the Q&A after this. But really, when Linda approached us, I thought I would take the opportunity to look not only at M&E systems, but to look at the intersectionalities, which I think are quite important in relation to gender and to a lesser extent, race as well, disability and ability, and noting that these factors also are quite key in building M&E systems and are often not taken into consideration as much as they should be. But really, this presentation is centered around 3 core themes, which I will get into in a little bit more detail. But yeah, so I've entitled it Breaking Boundaries, Redefining Pathways and Future Frontiers. Next slide, please. Thank you. So really, when we're talking about M&E systems and particularly gender mainstreaming, this is rooted in the foundations of human rights. The attempt is to deepen democracy, and there's an acknowledgement that, you know, there are social, cultural differences between men and women. And so gender mainstreaming intends to eliminate biases, and by redirecting policies, programs, projects, and aiming at fundamental transformation. So there is a consensus that monitoring and evaluation systems plays a critical role to ensure better development outcomes. And that's something that I really want to zoom in this presentation, is the emphasis on better development outcomes. And ultimately, what we do in monitoring and evaluation is about development outcomes. So when we're talking about better development outcomes, the idea is that we want better development outcomes for all, right? Next slide, please. So there was a study that was done by Parliamentarians Forum for Development Evaluation in South Asia, and they're supported by Eval Partners. And they showed that there are 20 countries globally with national evaluation policies, right? 4 of which are African, and only 2 of those are mainstreaming gender issues in those NEPs. Now, this is a 2017 statistic from AFREA. It could have changed a little bit, and so we're open to that, but I doubt that it's fundamentally changed from that number. But I want to, you know, there is a case, and there's so much evidence that has been brought up that we've looked at, which I'm sure you're also aware of, in terms of the case for gender equality, for gender mainstreaming, the case around, you know, economic productivity, social inclusion, human rights perspective. And so, you know, even with the evidence that exists, we still are not seeing that infiltration, right, from the level of policy, from planning, from that national level to actually what happens on the ground. We also still see divides between rural and urban, you know, spaces when it comes to gender parity. And if we can go to the next slide, please. So those are the kind of, you know, conflicting areas that we still battle with, right? So again, to emphasize the whole notion of developing monitoring and evaluation systems is for development outcomes for all. And this is something that we emphasize at Clear AA in our very own theory of change, is that everything that we do, and I'm responsible for capacity building, and all of the training that we might do, the professional development, the technical assistance, is to ultimately build a cadre of M&E professionals and practitioners in the space, so that ultimately, you know, the ultimate outcome is for development outcomes for all. Thank you. Next slide, please. Yeah, so in thinking about this and this platform, I really positioned my presentation around 3 themes, and that is M&E systems and gender. Secondly, impediments for women in the MEARL space. And then thirdly, improving systems for the development of gender parity and empowerment. And really, you know, it's I have only 30 minutes and really I want to make the most of it. And I cannot do justice in 30 minutes, but we will try. But to say within this space that my hope is to, at the very least, to be able to inspire at least to some level, that allows one to think about things a little bit differently and to be able to be moved to some kind of action in terms of thinking around what can you and I do differently that will open up space for women, that will reduce some of the challenges that women face and continue to face. And what are some of the structural issues? Yes, there might be structural impediments, but as individuals, what can we do? Whether it's coaching and mentoring, whether it's providing and sharing opportunities, but what are some of the things that we can look at and do that is going to make a difference? So that's something that I would want to leave with you, but I will speak a little bit more as we draw to an end. But these are the core themes that my presentation will focus around. Thank you. So why engendering M&E? Why is this important? So the core issue is that if we don't have a gender sensitive system that captures the nuances of how men and women and gender diverse individuals experience project or programs or policy interventions without this lens, organizations or governments can overlook essential data, right? That leads to incomplete or skewed results. So for instance, a project that's aimed at improving agricultural yields might inadvertently benefit male farmers more if it didn't consider specific challenges faced by female farmers. We've seen in cases, and I think UN Women often shares information on this, but where you might have a woman empowerment program, and you have the intended consequences, but you also have unintended consequences. And I think more often than not, those kinds of things are not adequately captured. So you might have a woman being empowered, but the unintended consequences that there's an increase in gender violence or gender-based violence, for example, things that were not planned around because maybe a woman has more money, she has more access, and at the same token, the husband might be feeling left out, and the power dynamics are shifting. So there's those kinds of things that it's important to look at, and this is why a gender-based system is important, and looking at these kind of variables. Yes, next slide, please. So despite the evidence, despite gender equality being widely recognized as a development objective, many systems, M&E systems, still do not adequately measure differences, right, when it comes to development outcomes for women, for men, for boys, for girls. And some of these things that are not captured, some of the important issues that are not captured, include, how a woman's multiple productive and reproductive and community maintenance, how all of these roles limit her ability to participate in and enjoy the full benefits of development initiatives, right? Women's access to and their control of productive resources. Other issues, constraints on women's access and enjoyment of a program benefits. Issues of gender-based violence, their participation in decision-making, right? At various levels, at not only national or community level, but also at the household level. So these are issues that are not often brought into, into systems and planning and thinking around systems. So despite the compelling evidence on persistent gender inequalities, conventional M&E systems fail to address these kinds of differences. Thank you. Next slide. So having said that, I think it's important to acknowledge that there has been a lot of work done, certainly at the policy level. There are regulatory frameworks that exist. And I think we know all too often that whilst many policies can exist, it doesn't always trickle down to be felt in a really tangible way at a local level. And also, seeing the differences between, like I mentioned before, our urban and rural divides. So some of the positive or the steps, positive steps that we have seen so far in terms of progress towards gender equality and social inclusion within the space. For example, the World Bank has a toolkit, and these are just a few, but really just to give us a sense, the World Bank has a toolkit on gender issues in M&E within agriculture. There's a gender-sensitive monitoring indicators technical advisory service by Danita. Clear AA, we've done a diagnostic study on gender responsiveness within national monitoring and evaluation systems. GIZ has guidelines on designing a gender-sensitive, results-based monitoring system. UN Women, they have a guideline on managing gender-sensitive evaluations. And also, yeah, so these are just a few out of many, guidelines, policies, and helpful, tools and toolkits that are available out there that really speak to the surge of sensitivity around this. And one of the points that I want to make is that it's so important that we move from gender sensitive to gender responsive. And what do I mean by that when we're talking about sensitive? Really, when we're speaking about sensitivity, we're speaking about our awareness, right? So if you're aware of how gender influences the opportunities of individuals in society, then you are gender sensitive. But if you are actively addressing the causes of gender inequality, then you are gender responsive. So there's a fundamental difference. And I think there has to be that migration from sensitivity, which is good and it's important, but we can't stay there. We have to move to actively addressing, those causes. And that's the kind of conversation that I'm hoping that we have today as we talk about that movement and locating where we are and how we get to that space of responsiveness. So at the same token, as much as there's been a lot of movement and a lot of growth that we've seen, and then I think that we can all identify and agree with, there still continue to be impediments in the space. There's still an unwillingness to transform. There's still issues around political, cultural, ideological perceptions, right, about women's involvement, gender roles and norms, right? How much power is given, an unwillingness to share power, right? So power dynamics. There's no funding around gender equity and empowerment. It's not prioritized in the budget. Again, inability to share those dynamics. So some of these, and we know that, and I think if we're honest, it's still a battle. It's still very much a battle. There's still, maybe it might exist at a policy level, but how often do we see it in our workspace where that power is actually shared? And where all the things that affect women are considered in a very nuanced way. And so the willingness to embrace change and the willingness to embrace transformation can differ quite considerably depending on, the country you're in, maybe the region, an urban environment or, different spaces. So there's still very much challenges that exist. And I think thinking about how we can solve these issues and how we can get around it is really where I want to steer this conversation as we move along this presentation. So when we're talking about improving systems for development of gender parity and empowerment, one of the things that I really want to say and acknowledge about, women in MEARL. And when putting this presentation together was very specific, not just to speak about, because it's quite easy to speak about M&E systems and talk about all of the things that need to be in place and, be almost clinical about it. But because this is a woman in MEARL platform, it was important for me to locate gender, to locate the issues and that are specific to women, right? And I think it's not possible to do that without reflecting the issues around patriarchy and acknowledging that we still face such issues, around male domination, around who, around power, and also being aware about whether we are in fact also complicit to some of these challenges and the ways in which we might complicit. And I think if we're honest about that, looking at how we might be doing so, So some of the possibilities that I've fleshed out here for improving the systems and how we can get to a place of gender parity is to amplify the voices of women, and platforms like this, other platforms where women are supporting women, not only fleshing out the issues, but looking at, concrete ways in which we can build skills, share, peer learning as professionals. How can we engage one another? How can we share with one another? I've said to Linda and the secretariat of this platform that we're more than happy to share. We can do a workshop, because really, if I have to talk on or facilitate on any kind of training, which is my core responsibility at CLEAR, it takes days, right? But we're also willing to share, like in workshops or half-a-day sessions, whether it's on indicators or theory of change, developing log frames, stakeholder analysis, all of that we can do. So peer learning, lobbying and advocacy, right? How do we engage the entire M&E ecosystem? And so I'll show you a picture of what I mean when I talk about a diagram, when I talk about the M&E ecosystem, the various players that are at stake, right? Or have a stake in the M&E space. So if you're looking at VOPs, that's your voluntary organizations. In South Africa, it would be SAMIA, right? The South African Monitoring and Evaluation Association. If you have that in your country, higher education institutions, government, NGOs, how do all of these different players come together? How do they interact? How do they support capacity building, right? And how do you interact with these different spaces and these different ecosystems? When there's training, you're able to access that. And so being able to access these different players within the ecosystem is important, and ultimately to be able to get to a place where one can influence these different players, right? So building the skills, the different skills across platforms, it's important to participate in various knowledge sharing platforms like this, other webinars that's going on. LinkedIn is, there's a flurry of available resources and oftentimes free, right? What about coaching and mentoring? If you are a woman in senior leadership, right, and a woman that has relative access to power, you have the ability to be able to share. What are you doing for mentoring and coaching, right? Are you able to do so to empower another woman, a young woman that might be in university? Opportunities to share, to mentor, opportunities to share, not only other opportunities that exist, but to be able to share your own skills, right? Even in your own workspace, training and professional development, to be able to provide whatever your skill is. Maybe you have skills in quantitative analysis, quantitative research, to be able to take 3 hours out of a day and say, okay, this is the service that I'm going to provide, right? Embracing AI, for example. There's so much stuff, like in the last 2 years, it's just crazy. One can't even keep up with the kind of changes that's happening with AI. There's AI for data analysis within research that really takes the drudgery out. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, one should not outsource their intellectual capacity or capabilities when it comes to AI. But certainly there is a space for it and there's room for it when it comes to the mundane type of task. But what I'm saying is how, leveraging AI within the MEARL space, within our various ways of working, and how we could use that, how we can use that to benefit for ourselves, but also to help others with that, right? Scholarships that exist to expand the M&E space, but specifically for women, and increasing those opportunities within that space. And certainly to say that it's so important that more women are involved at the different levels within M&E, within MEARL, right? Whether we're talking about data collection, whether we're talking about research writing, whether we're talking about conducting evaluations, whether we're talking about at the planning level, at the design level, every area, right, every area and every component is a space that we need to be able to advance, gender equality, and in thinking about this, in developing it right from the design phase to the implementation phase, because what we want to really emphasize again is the development outcome. And the development outcomes in terms of gender parity, how are we benefiting, how are men benefiting from this, and how are women benefiting? And if it's not equal, then we need to address those questions. But these are some of the areas that I wanted to pull out that are possibilities for us to improve the systems when it comes to gender parity and empowerment within M&E systems. Next slide, please. Yes. So this is a picture. I don't know how legible it is for you, but really what I wanted to do here was just kind of, because I was talking to M&E, the ecosystems, but you will see there's individuals, right? We have higher education institutions and research institutions. You've got governments to the right-hand side. You've got development partners. So development partners can be like your World Bank, your MasterCard Foundation, for example, Ford Foundation, UNDPs, your UNICEFs, etc. You've got your VOPs on the left-hand side, which is a voluntary organization, professional of evaluators, right? And that would be a mix of people from NGOs, actors from government. It's a whole mix, and so that's a very important space to be involved in and to participate in. And so I would encourage you to get involved in that, especially if you are an M&E practitioner, you want to grow in the space, you want to really develop in the space, is to be connected, right? Stay connected in what's going on. Plug into these kinds of forums and get involved as far as possible. And then the private sector. So you have your context in terms of the various aspects around history, traditions, interests, who is involved for what, what they're looking to accomplish, and there's dynamics around incentives. What are the incentives for getting involved, for conducting evaluations, for monitoring? And there's learning dynamics. And I think it's important to say that the L is important within the MEARL, right? And that's the learning around monitoring, around evaluation, around research, that every process has got to teach us something, whether you're involved in training or, you're not just gathering information for gathering information. We're not just researching for researching's sake, right? But the question at the end of it, there should be a learning agenda. What are we learning about our processes? What are we learning about our systems? What are we learning about the ways in which we're engaging our stakeholders? Could we be doing certain things better? Could we be doing it more effectively? Does this tool need 30 questions when it could just actually be 5 questions, right? And at this point, I want to say this intuition, right? Because that's what I think it also is, and the evaluative thinking, which is a critical skill in the space. And I want to highlight how important intuition is, particularly for women, because I think that this is a gift that women have been given, and not to shy away from this gift, not to shy away from it, and use it and embrace it within the M&E work that you do, in the research work that you do. That sense making and that evaluative thinking is so important, and that is what will give you the edge. And using that intuition to be able to say, but you know what, this doesn't quite feel right. Let me try this. Let me try this interview this way. Let me try and apply this, in a particular way, because that doesn't quite make sense. So that's a very important skill that one really needs to embrace, and I think is quite nuanced to women. So this is a picture of an overview of a country M&E ecosystem, and how all of these important players come together, looking at policy planning and budgeting, the processes, how it feeds into monitoring and reporting and evaluation, and so on. The cycle goes. And this is something that we use with the GEI, which is the Global Evaluation Initiative, and they are umbrella body over the CLEAR centers. Thank you. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as I conclude, and Linda poses some questions that I've plotted out here, I really want to emphasize, number one, M&E systems are about people. right? And it is about better development outcomes for us all, women, men, boys and girls. And so there needs to be that equality. And in thinking about developing systems, it is important that we are not just developing generic systems, but that we are engendering our M&E systems. The evidence is there. There's a case to be made about economic productivity. There's a case to be made about social inclusion and fundamental human rights, and including women at the right levels within decision making, not just access, but across the different levels at community, household, and moving away from sensitivity to responsiveness that speaks to actively acting, right? So it speaks to action. And so I would hope that this challenges us to think about how we are moving the needle forward when it comes to gender parity, and how we're thinking about the different ways in which we can create a space for our own growth, yes, but for other women. Or we're consciously thinking about how we can take somebody on, whether it's a younger woman, a less experienced woman, and to support her to be able to open spaces, whether it's calling out, discriminatory action, whether it's, speaking to opportunities that can be broadened, whether it's sharing particular skills with others. And so thinking about what we can do to really shift the needle in this way. Thank you so much. Over to you, Linda.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you. This has been really insightful, Jenean. Thank you. Shall we acknowledge her presentation? It's been very deep revelations of what we can do to improve M&E systems and mainstreaming gender in our work. Thank you so much. Okay, so the floor is open for further engagement. If you'd like to ask Jenean any questions or share any comments or even experiences that you've had in developing M&E systems in your work, or if it's something that you're interested in, you can feel free to ask Jenean. So you can type in the chat window, or you can unmute and ask. Okay, I think there are a few comments in the chat, so I'll begin with those. Okay, so I think, so right at the beginning, Nina had shared her expectations. I hope, Nina, your expectations have been met. So she said one of her expectations is to identify the challenges facing women in the meal sector and share experiences. The second one is on identifying palliative approaches to overcoming these challenges as women, and how to better approach and envisage monitoring and evaluation from a women's perspective. Nina, I hope your expectations have been met, but if not, you can still ask any questions you might have, because I think some of your questions have been addressed in some ways, but feel free to follow up on anything which is unclear. Okay, then we have Tammy. So she said, I'd like to know how to produce something similar. That's the ecosystem view. I believe she's referring to the graphic or the image that was part of the presentation. So she wants to know if there's any shareable content.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thanks, Linda. Should I go ahead, and are there still some other?
Yeah, there are a few comments. Okay, so some people are commending you for the presentation, inspiring insights indeed, insightful presentation. And then so Joy asks, she has two questions. So she said, to what extent does culture affect gender mainstreaming in MEARL, and especially in the African context? And then the second question she has is the experience different in non-African countries? Okay. And then Tammy also has her hand raised, but would you want to start with the ones in the chat? And then
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay.
Okay,
so Tammy, we'll come back to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jenean, shall I go, Linda?
Yes, please.
Okay, so there's definitely shareable content, and I mean, this is what this is about. I have a resource page that was the last presentation on the slide, and I think Linda will be sharing this. But that is by no means exhaustive, but it certainly speaks to a lot of the issues that I've raised here. And you can definitely find more information. One of the sites here, Better Evaluation, there's so much stuff in there around frameworks, around, systems, just tons and tons of stuff around developing theories of change, all of that. The first one is a paper by my colleagues in CLEAR that have compared systems. We do a lot of work on the continent, particularly in Anglophone Africa. And so there was a comparison between different countries and the levels of maturity in terms of M&E systems and where they are. So I think you'll find that quite useful. And Mari Brown, she has amazing stuff. I'm sure if you're on LinkedIn, you would have seen a lot of stuff that she shares. Is also the data and the visualization of her stuff is really great. So I love her work. Yeah, and just some other articles. Twin Mbele, also a great resource. You can find a diagnostic of gender responsiveness. In fact, they actually also did a nice piece of work as a comparison, Joy, on culture, but it's looking at M&E culture in general and sort of comparing between countries how they've kind of moved, the culture. And so what I loved about that is showing how culture takes time, right? I think anytime we're talking about social norms and we're talking about culture, it doesn't happen overnight. So I appreciate your question around, to what extent does culture affect mainstreaming? And I think it does. It definitely does. And I would venture to say that it's a lot more difficult and it's a lot more pronounced on the African continent than it would be in Europe. Or like if I'm saying non-African countries, I would say Europe is less so. You can go into Europe, you will see women bus drivers, for example, and it's not a thing, right? So there's definitely that nuance in terms of the gender roles within the continent is still there. Woman must do this, woman must earn that, whatever, So I think we have a long way to go, but I'm encouraged by what I see on the continent. And I think there's definitely marks. Look at Rwanda, for instance. Rwanda is one of the top performing in terms of gender parities. They have the most women in parliament, that speaks to very high level decision-making power. But on the flip side, if you go to the rural areas, it's a little bit different. But at the same time, they also they have farms, they are involved in coffee farming, tea farming, they're growing. And I think it speaks to leadership. President Kagame is very involved in investing in women and investing in the economy in general. And I think when there's that realization that there's a case to be made when it comes to economic productivity, and that including women into the mainstream is not just good for social inclusion, right? But it's good for the economy. So I think that the experience is definitely different on the continent compared to, even our Asian counterparts, right? But I think there's a lot more work that we do have to do. And I think I would want to emphasize the role and the emphasis being on us creating our own space. And us, as women, leading in that space to be able to open the space for other women, to be able to push, and influence in policy spaces and wherever we need to, but to invest in ourselves, So definitely some fundamental differences there. I hope that helps. Have I missed anything, Linda, please?
Let me check. I think you're on track. Yeah, just a few comments. I think people are enjoying the presentation. So Josephine said, I enjoyed the depth of analysis and clarity of your presentation, Jenean. Greetings from Malawi. Yeah, Blessing said, very informative presentation. Thank you. Okay, Joy said she's fine with your response. Great, thanks, Jenean, and agreed leadership plays an important role. Sure. Okay, I saw Tammy's hand. Tammy, would you want to go ahead, please?
Right, absolutely. Thank you. I may have jumped in a little bit late into the conversation, but I don't remember hearing, I did get a part about us empowering those that come after us So now I'm asking this not from a cancel culture viewpoint. I'm not trying to cancel what has already been said. I fully agree. But as a boy mom, I believe it kind of puts me in a certain space, and I'd like to get everybody's view on it, on how then, as a boy mom who believes in gender parity within the African context, do you then try to build up or create allies in the same way as being, having, I mean, I envision a place where men also are made gender aware, as much as we are also becoming gender aware of ourselves and our contributions. How do we make or produce those that come after us who happen to be male to also be on the same trajectory? That's basically, yeah, that's what I wanted to ask.
Great. Thanks, Tammy. I think that's such an important point or question that you raised there. And I think to acknowledge that, when we're talking about gender equality, we definitely don't want to be pushing girls above boys. I don't think that is the idea. And I'm not saying that that is what you are alluding to, but I think that it is very important that we are raising at the same level, that whilst we're bringing girls in and women further in, at the same time, we should be, allaying fears that the boy child might feel, or the male. So the example that I made earlier about gender empowerment, and many projects have shown us where, women have been empowered, they have more access to, like, maybe, financial access to loans, for example, for small businesses. And now suddenly, the male feels left out. There's a power dynamic shift, but it's important that there's programs that help the male also to understand, how this is going to benefit the home. And so there's certain things that happen, and I think are important to be conscientized around what those things mean, right? So for your son, for example, what it might mean in terms of what messaging you give him, as well as the dad, because I think that's very important, is the communication of the dad to the son, and that role, to show that, son, you can be quite comfortable and you can be okay, even if your sister or even if a woman is advancing, it takes nothing away from you as a male. And I think these are the conversations that don't happen as often as they need to, especially in the African context. And so, males are I think around that, a lot of it is fear, and around power. So when that dynamic happens and nobody's talking about it, I think that's when fear set in. Oh, she won't need me anymore, right? If it's a husband, or she's got this money now, she's going to get somebody else. And so when we talk about it, like, maybe to your son, to say, look, this is quite okay, because this is allowing her to do that, and by you being acceptable, and by you being supportive, and by you not being threatened, I think that kind of language and that kind of support will go a long way. And I think more of that kind of thing needs to happen. That kind of approach needs to happen for there to be a clear understanding. And I think UN Women do a lot of work. There's a lot of programs, when it comes to gender empowerment programs, where they are actively involved with the boy child as well, and men as well, when they're involved in gender empowerment programs. Hope that helps or answers somewhat.
It has, thank you. I think I will also try to keep up with the UN and try to get some of that content. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
All right. Any more questions from anyone? Please, there's still time. We can take maybe 2 more questions. Or if you want to share a comment, you can do that as well. Okay, so there's a comment from Inganje, who says, great session. Great, thank you. Okay, maybe while participants think through their questions, I just have a quick one. So in my line of work, I have the privilege of working with some projects which are being implemented in the Global South. And one of the expectations we have as an organization is to have them provide gender disaggregated data from their field work or with their, with the people that they're interacting with or the beneficiaries. So I think we've observed for some time that sometimes some of the projects, they are good at providing like the overall total or like the total number of people they are providing, support to, but sometimes like breaking this data down into gender, based on, like let's say looking at the number of males and looking at the number of females that are benefiting, it can be a challenge. So how do maybe someone in my capacity as a male professional supporting these projects, how do I overcome or address this with the projects? Like, what are some of the things that could guide me in my conversations with them, just to make them know that it's important that we need this data, because the funders that are also reliant on this information to also, include in their reports. And it's also like, it also helps them to meet their like overall goals and KPIs as well. So I mean, in your line of work, maybe some guidelines or, some advice on that.
Yeah, I think it's important that we integrate such things in the project design or program design.
Yeah.
And I think in the design phase, because this is where, the thinking is involved, and this is where you want to communicate why you're doing, so the why question behind what you're doing is quite critical, yeah. And I think having the key players together in the same room, whether you're developing rubrics around, particular things in your work, and how you're going about it, but being able to have that communication with the right people at the design phase is quite important, so that you're not at the back end later on trying to retrospectively fit in things or being, running after somebody to say, well, actually, I need these, and I think we're all guilty of that. We've all landed up in spaces where like, oops, I didn't get the data for that, and we're trying to find it, and we learn from it and we grow from it and we can do better. But I think it's important to say that that design stage is quite important, and when we're putting together that that stakeholder list, it's like, okay, who needs to be in the room here, and what's the key messages that we get across? And so when people go out into the different phases, there's a key understanding of why we need that data. It's not just for ticking boxes, but there's a clear understanding behind why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah, and maybe just to provide context, so we do, as much as possible, try to make them aware right at the beginning when they receive the funding. We take them through like an induction workshop, and we stress a lot on that. There's also like a guidance document that we give to them to access the indicators that we are expecting them to report on, and they all have like instructions on how to disaggregate. But we'll see how it goes. As you said, like, we just have to take it one step at a time. So
and maybe also still reflecting on the learnings. So if it's something that's not practiced, to note it in the learnings, and then in the next iterative session, to be able to say, okay, this is what we've learned from before. This is something that we're doing well in, and commend the group. But this is an area that still seems to be problematic. And if it's problematic, maybe to uncover what are the issues around that, and then to try and problem solve, around what those could be.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Okay, any more from anyone? I think everyone is fine. Okay. Great. Okay, any final thoughts before I end with some few announcements? Jenean, any parting words, anything you would like to share?
No, maybe just to thank everybody and to acknowledge that that you are all have your diverse experience and diverse skills, and so do not take that for granted. Share as much as you can, and plug into the different spaces, build your skills. If you can contribute to knowledge products, in as much as you consume, but also share. I think, you know, we can learn so much from each other, you know, and we all have something valuable to add and to contribute. So really thank you also, Linda. Thank you once again for being a part of this. And I really want to wish the platform well as you continue to grow. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Jenean. Okay, so participants, before we draw the curtain down, I'd like to thank you all for joining this month's session. Please feel free to provide us with any feedback on how the session went and which kind of sessions you're looking forward to. You can propose any topics, or if you would like to volunteer to be a speaker on any of our sessions, please feel free to indicate in the feedback form. And then secondly, we have Women in MEARL YouTube channel. So I've shared the link there. You can access the sessions that we've had previously, and today's session, which has been recorded, will also be uploaded there, so you can recap and yeah, access this great presentation by Jenean today. And you can follow us on Twitter. So share the Twitter link, or X, now it's called X. So you can follow us on X, and you can also visit our page on LinkedIn as well, just to get updates on our subsequent meetups and anything interesting that would want to share with all our community members and participants as well. All right, so thank you all for joining. It's been a great session. Thank you, Jenean, once again. It won't be the last time we'll be inviting you, hopefully. So yes, we look forward to engaging all of you at our next meetup in October. And yeah, wishing you the very best as we end the month of September. All right, bye.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Linda. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.